She got eliminated, and the tournament still belongs to her. A 21-year-old gets knocked out in straight sets. No trophy, no comeback, game over in just over an hour. And yet, days later, the tournament director is still talking about her like she's the headliner, because the numbers say she basically was. 1 player, 0 titles at that event, and an entire stadium that changed color because of her. Stick around, because by the end of this video you'll understand exactly how someone loses a tennis match and still becomes the story of the tournament. Here's the part almost nobody outside the Philippines saw coming. Before this summer, no Filipino player, man or woman, had ever won a main draw match at this tournament in its entire history. She didn't just win 1, she won 3. She sold out a stadium seat by seat. She got tournament organizers scrambling to add a new item to the food menu because of her fans. And then, in less than 75 minutes, it was over. What happens next, how a straight sets loss somehow becomes the headline everyone remembers, is a story about what tennis is turning into. Let's get into it. And if you're new here, hit subscribe now, because we're going deep on the stories behind the scoreboard, and you don't want to miss what's coming after this one. The title nobody saw coming. To understand what happened in Toronto, you have to rewind 1 week to Washington, D.C. Alexandra Eala walked into the Mubadala City D.C. Open as a talented, well-liked pro with a growing reputation, but not as a favorite. By the time she walked out, she was a WTA Tour champion, the first one in the history of Philippine tennis. Not the first woman, not the first in a decade. The first, period, in a country of over 100 million people that had never produced a tour-level titleist before her. Getting there wasn't clean. She had to fight through a rain-delayed final that got suspended overnight and picked back up the next day, grinding out a 3-set win over American star Jessica Pegula, a top-tier, top-5 caliber opponent, to close it out. Pegula herself had nothing but respect afterward, joking that her own podcast picked up thousands of new followers just from the wave of Filipino fans who showed up to support Eala that week. That's the win. Now here's the part that made it dangerous for her body. She barely had a day to enjoy it. 24 hours later, she was on a plane to Toronto for the next tournament on the calendar, the National Bank Open. A WTA 1000, 1 rung below a Grand Slam in prestige and points. Different city, different opponents, and 0 time to recover. She said as much herself, landing in Toronto and telling reporters it had been an emotional whiplash, trying to process one tournament while stepping straight into the next. Most players would call that a scheduling nightmare. Eala called it exciting. That tells you something about who we're dealing with here. Toronto was never supposed to be like this. Here's what nobody in Toronto's tennis scene expected. A player ranked outside the top 20 walking in and instantly becoming the most in-demand ticket of the entire tournament. Within hours of her draw being announced, thousands of tickets moved. Her opening match had to be slotted into the night session on Center Court, the biggest stage the tournament has, right alongside Canada's own hometown favorite, Leylah Fernandez. 2 crowd pullers, 1 night, 1 stadium that was about to get very, very loud. And loud doesn't really cover it. Reports out of Sobe Stadium described a sea of Philippine flags. Fans who'd flown in. Fans who'd driven in from other provinces. A community that treated her matches less like sporting events and more like national celebrations. Tournament director Karl Hale didn't dance around it in interviews. He said flat out that he'd never seen a player outside the top 5 generate this kind of pull, and that having her in the draw was changing the entire atmosphere of the event. Her first match in Toronto was a statement. She beat American Alicia Parks in 3 tight sets, becoming the first Filipino player, man or woman, to ever win a main draw match at this tournament. Not just her first win there, the first win ever by anyone from her country in the tournament's entire history. She followed it up with an even tougher test, a marathon 3-setter against Katie McNally, an American who'd already knocked out a Grand Slam champion earlier that week. Eala battled through a late-night classic and through a scary moment with her ankle to close it out and reach the round of 16. 7 straight match wins now, stretching back through her Washington title run. 7 and counting. The party before the storm. By this point in the tournament, something bigger than tennis was happening in that stadium, and everyone around the sport noticed it. Fernandez, whose own mother is Filipino-Canadian, talked openly about how much pride the community takes in supporting anyone with ties to the Philippines, wherever they compete. Pagula, the player Eala had just beaten in the Washington final, said the fan surge helped grow her own audience. And Hale, the same tournament director watching ticket sales spike in real time, kept describing it in interviews as something he genuinely never experienced before at his own event. This is the part where, if this were a fairy tale, we'd cut straight to the trophy ceremony. It isn't a fairy tale. It's professional sports. And professional sports doesn't care how good your story is. The wall named Belinda Bencic. Waiting in the round of 16 was Belinda Bencic, a former world number 4, an Olympic gold medalist, and the actual 2015 champion of this exact tournament. This wasn't a rising player. This was a proven closer standing directly between Eala and a shot at the quarterfinals. For a set, it was a real fight. Eala matched her point for point, clawing back to level the first set at 4 games apiece. But Bencic had an answer for everything. She broke serve late, closed out the first set 6-4, and then something happened that no one in that building wanted to watch. The second set got away from Eala completely. Bencic won every single game. 6-love. A bagel on the biggest stage of the tournament, in front of the exact fans who turned that stadium into a home game. The whole match lasted a little over an hour, and by the time it ended, everyone watching understood exactly why. This was Eala's 9th match in 13 days, across 2 different countries, including a title run that went the distance in a rain-delayed final. Her body had simply run out of runway. Bencic, for what it's worth, was gracious about it afterward, telling the crowd she knew who they'd come to cheer for, and thanking them anyway for the atmosphere. Grace in the loss. Here's where a lot of young athletes would crack. Excuses. Blaming the schedule. Blaming the ankle. Eala didn't go there. In her press conference afterward, she called it, in her own words, a really good week overall and said she was proud of the run. No excuses about the travel. No complaints about the back-to-back 3-setters. Just an honest acknowledgement that her opponent played the better tennis that night, and a promise that she'd recover and come back stronger. It's a small moment, but it says a lot. This wasn't just a fan phenomenon riding a wave of hype. This was a competitor who understood the difference between a disappointing scoreline and a disappointing tournament. And she clearly didn't see this as the second one. The story that refused to end. Here's the twist nobody in that stadium expected on the night she lost. Her Toronto story wasn't actually over. Days before, she and Venus Williams, yes, that Venus Williams, had been awarded a wild card into the doubles draw. 2 generations of the sport, one alongside a rising star from Southeast Asia, the other a 7-time Grand Slam singles champion who helped build the modern women's game. It's the kind of pairing that turns a routine doubles match into an event of its own, and it meant Eala's name stayed on the tournament schedule long after her singles exit. And that's really the heart of what happened in Toronto this year. A tournament director who has run this event for years stood in front of cameras and said, on the record, that he had never seen a player ranked outside the top 5 move tickets, fill a stadium, and shift the entire energy of his tournament the way Eala did. Not once during the run. Repeatedly, across multiple interviews, as her matches kept selling out night after night. Why this actually matters. Step back from the scoreline for a second, because the scoreline is honestly the least interesting part of this story. The Philippines has never had a tennis star like this. Not male, not female, not ever. A country with a massive, passionate, globally scattered diaspora suddenly had a reason to gather around a tennis court. In Washington, then in Toronto, and increasingly at every tournament she plays. You had fans telling reporters they felt like honorary Filipinos for the night just from being in that crowd. You had a Canadian tournament director openly crediting one player, half a world away from her home country, for reshaping the atmosphere of his event. And this didn't come out of nowhere. In 2025, she'd already announced herself with a run to the semifinals of the Miami Open, taking down multiple top 5 players along the way. This year, she became the first Filipino player to reach the 4th round of a Grand Slam singles draw, doing it at Wimbledon of all places. Then came the Washington title. Then came Toronto. This wasn't a one-week story. This was a season-long climb that happened to hit its loudest, most visible peak in a stadium packed with people who'd waited their whole lives to see someone like her play on a stage like that. Where it goes from here. So where does she go after Toronto? Straight back into the grind of the North American hardcourt swing, chasing ranking points, chasing the next title, carrying a fan base that is now, undeniably, one of the most passionate traveling supporter groups in the entire sport. She's 21 years old. She's already a tour champion. She's already made history at a Grand Slam. And she just proved that she can fill a stadium in a country she doesn't even call home. The question now isn't whether Eala matters to tennis. Toronto already answered that. The real question is how high this run actually takes her, and whether the next tournament produces a different final scoreline. If you want to be there when we find out, subscribe now because this story is nowhere close to finished. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of the Eala story. Drop your prediction for her next tournament in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one.